Well, hello everybody, and thanks very much for joining me for another Science Scoop. So today I'm joined by Dr. Steve Meller, who's the co-founder and CEO of CH4 Global, whose bold vision is for zero methane agriculture by bending the climate curve. So this is very relevant to the world right now. So Steve is US-based. He's an entrepreneur, an investor, an innovator, founder and board advisor, and has consulted with more than 25 Fortune 200 companies around how to best leverage external technology and innovations to drive top and bottom line growth. CH4 has developed sustainable, globally scaled products containing a unique seaweed, and I have to take a little moment to say this correctly, Asparagopsis, um, to reduce methane emissions from livestock. And with over 10 years of research behind it, this seaweed has shown effects of 60 to 90% reduction in methane emissions from both dairy and beef cattle and also sheep. So Steve, welcome very much. I understand you're in Las Vegas today.
I am. Thank you very much for having me, Judith. I really appreciate it. Look forward to sharing part of our story.
Great. Well, Steve, you're the co-founder and CEO of CH4 Global. Can you please start off with a bit of background on yourself, your past tenures and ventures and your PhD?
Sure. So I'm an Aussie. Hopefully you can all still tell that. I've lived in the US now for 35 years, though. My PhD was in South Australia, University of Adelaide, and it's in neuroscience, really studying the mechanisms of chronic pain. I came across to the US and did a postdoc and had a faculty position at University of Iowa, and then got recruited to come and work for Procter & Gamble, who is the world's largest consumer products company. I didn't really know much about them when they recruited me, but they wanted me to come in and set up a completely new research program. And that started an 18-year journey. They promptly sold about a year after I got there all of the paint business. And so I was left with, frankly, being allowed to be an entrepreneur inside of a big company. So created a number of new innovations, products, and capabilities for the company that became highly profitable. And about almost 11 years ago now, took an early retirement. Cincinnati is the global headquarters for that. I moved out to Silicon Valley. My wife is from there. She's a professor there, and we were there for almost 10 years, where I did a lot of loosely consulting. And in the last 4.5 years, we started CH4 Global. It actually started as a New Zealand entity. It's now a US headquartered entity with a wholly owned subsidiary both in New Zealand and Australia. And here I am today, bringing this to fruition and to global scale.
Well, which brings me to the question of what drove you to this inception of CH4 Global?
So it's a long answer, and I'm going to try to shorten it. Okay. In those early years of my retirement, I was asked by CSIRO, Australia's national science agency, to come in and review effectively most of the portfolio of the entire organization to what were the most disruptive innovations, come up with my top 10 list, so to speak. And so I did that over a fairly intensive period. And this work that had been going on for quite a number of years in there around Asparagopsis, under wraps, so to speak. And given my background, I was able to look at the data and said, this is going to be incredibly effective and incredibly safe. But nobody cared about methane at that stage. In fact, it wasn't until I was in New Zealand 4.5 years ago giving a keynote talk, and I went to the lunch session afterwards to listen to 5 politicians, 2 from New Zealand and 3 from Pacific Islanders, including a head of state. And the head of state of one of the Pacific Islands was talking passionately about the impact of rising sea levels and permanently relocating people to Fiji. And at that stage, I lived in California, who had mandated by law a methane reduction that couldn't be achieved in any other way. And so I listened to him, and the confluence of those events says, I can solve your problem if we grow this at massive scale. So the company was literally born that day. and we've been on this journey of understanding how to build scalability. So being in the right place at the right time.
Yes, absolutely. And being open to ideas, isn't it? You've just got to take those opportunities.
You never know what passes in front of you, and if you're not keeping your eyes broadly open, you miss them all.
So, Asparagopsis seaweed, can you speak to this? So, how does it actually work reducing methane emissions from both dairy, beef, cattle, and also sheep?
So I'll give you what is a simpler explanation with a lot of biology that goes behind it that I will sort of partly leave out, but happily to go into details. So cows eat generally grains if they're in feedlots, or grasses of various sorts if they're grazing animals. Both of those are what I'll call complex carbohydrates. And ruminants have the machinery to break that down into energy packets, so to speak, that's absorbed by the cow to do what the cow does, make milk and make beef. And along the way, the microbes that exist, these ones called methanogens in the rumen, we don't have them in our stomach. We actually have them in our colon, but we don't have them in our stomach. And so as they're breaking that down, the penalty, so to speak, that the cow pays is about 12% of the calories that a cow takes in gets burped out as methane, simple carbon and 4 hydrogens. And the way Asparagopsis work is interferes with the enzyme that effectively assembles methane. So it's one of the very, very last steps. It doesn't change the functionality of what's going on in the room, and it effectively just eliminates it. So that's simply how it works.
Right. And I think I've seen work on this happening at Hawthorne Institute, possibly in Nelson.
Yes.
So the same people, because I remember this a couple of years back when I went to visit them, and they said that there was some great work going on here. So I'm pleased that I'm talking about the right seaweed there.
You
So
are.
how did you first discover the seaweed's ability to reduce methane emissions?
So that was all the work done by CSIRO and some collaborative work between a CSIRO researcher, Rob Kinley, and some of the folks at James Cook University who are really aquaculturists. And so they got together and really uncovered this mechanism and filed some intellectual property around the use of Asparagopsis for the purpose of methane reduction. So that's sort of how it started. And now what we're doing is working out all of the ways to grow it at very large scale for very large impact.
And undoubtedly, there's been an awful lot of research and development that's gone into this over quite a long period of time. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Sort of roughly 10 years worth of R&D across what CSIRO has been doing now, in terms of there's probably 7 or 8 or maybe even 9 companies who are looking to try to produce material for commercial scale spread across the world, and all of the R&D and development that's going on in them. That work tends to be more focused on not the fundamental mechanisms. A lot of that was done by CSIRO and other independent universities. The work we do, for example, and others, is about how do you formulate it and package it so they can have the right impact, which is really quite a different formulation for a grazing dairy cow versus a feedlot beef cow. And so we're building those for those markets.
So where does the Asparagopsis grow? I mean, obviously it's seaweed, but where? In particular countries, certain climates? Where
There
is it
are
available?
there are 2 broad forms. One called Asparagopsis armata, which generally likes to grow in cooler waters, and its genetic native home is New Zealand and the southern part of Australia, sort of parts of Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, and West Australia. It exists in many other places around the world, but it's been carried there on the hulls of ships. So the Chilean fjords, the Mediterranean, off the coast of Ireland, South Africa. And so growing it in those areas, it's not a native species. And so that presents some challenges because it's quite an aggressive species in that sense. And you've got a whole variety of United Nations biodiversity treaties. The warmer water version, called Asparagopsis taxiformis, generally is endemic to much of the Pacific, not all, but much of it. parts of Southeast Asia, and parts of the Indian Ocean. And again, it exists in other locations traveled around in here. Australia actually is unique in the fact that it has both species as natives. If you include the Kermadec Islands, which obviously are a part of New Zealand, you actually have both species as well.
So there's a natural advantage for both Australia and New Zealand here, isn't there? That can be ignored.
Undoubtedly, there's no question about it. So, but both in terms of the number of livestock in both countries, the agriculture, agrarian-based economies, and native seaweed.
So where does CH4 Global currently operate from? What's your base now?
So we've spent some time working out how to grow it. So this is the prelude to your question. We don't grow it in the ocean. Growing it in the ocean means it's quite unpredictable, changes in water temperature and seasonality to being able to grow it in here. It's really not commercially feasible to do that at any level of scale. One can certainly do it on a regional basis. And so it's grown on land in various types of contained systems. If you were to go and look at the way people aquaculture finfish or shellfish today, for the most part, it's not particularly different. Our operations that we currently have are in South Australia, in a couple of locations there, and actually in a couple of locations in New Zealand. Bluff on the southern end, and actually we share parts of the facilities that NIWA has up in Northland.
So you introduced Methane Tamer this year, is it? Can you speak to that, please?
So Methane Tamer is what we would call a branded product. So it includes the raw material of the processed, the grown in tanks and the processed seaweed. We include other excipients in there to make it tasty and stabilized and able to be mixed into feedlot products that are currently used around the world. And so Methane Tamer is a brand really that's focused on that market. As we finalize the formulations for grazing dairy cattle, which will be in about 12 months' time ready for market, that'll have a different branded piece to it in here. Can't tell you the name because we actually haven't worked on what it would be yet, but that product would be coming out, about a year from now.
So, Steve, I constantly come across deep tech businesses that become overnight successes after about 10 or 15 years. And I wonder if this is going to be another one, another global product that's going to be an overnight success after many years of work.
So I think the 10 years is already up, given all of the preliminary research work that CSIRO and James Cook University started. Our focus is on bringing it to commercial scale. We're building today what we would call the world's first commercial scale facility. It's being built in South Australia at the moment. We can only build one, and that's the location we chose for a variety of reasons out of our operations. 100% of that output has already been effectively pre-sold to 3 commercial partners. They're all feedlots in that sense. And the next scale that comes beyond that is partnerships that we're forming with very large global corporates in various parts of the world. So you'll see some announcements coming out over the next few months that will highlight some of those global partnerships across industries in here. So it's at commercial scale now.
So it has enormous potential to assist New Zealand and other countries to meet their climate change goals around greenhouse gases.
I think it's the key.
Yeah, and I think it's. I've always said you've got to trust the science. Science always has the solution. You just got to wait long enough and do enough work.
I would agree with you 100%.
Yeah, there's also an Ecco Park in New Zealand that you're working on to roll out. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So down in Bluff, we've built the first phase. So we call an Ecco Park this contained system, and it's really just a name, in fact, that we've trademarked in here. But the Ecco Park is where we grow the material and process it ultimately. And so down in Bluff, we've set up operations. We've expanded those operations already now a couple of times, and we'll continue to do so. And in that environment, so we've got folks who want to live down in Bluff. It's cold and windy, so that you have to be a special sort of person. But luckily, we've got some great folks who are down in that location and happily growing away seaweed in here to maturity, and then we divide it up and put it into more vessels and continue to grow it. It doubles in volume or size about every 2 weeks or so. So you wait long enough, you have enough of it to then be able to use for a larger amount of cattle. So
yeah. Oh no, that's great. So well, also your people living in Bluff will possibly want good access to the world's best oysters. So
I think they have worked out how to find everything that they need down there that meets their both dietary and other needs. So,
oh, I'm sure. So, lastly, do you have any comments to make on how you see New Zealand placed when you think about the climate change action and awareness, and how we can be part of the success story for the world?
so I'm going to answer that in two ways. The first is it's clear, depends a little bit on how you choose to want to measure it, but somewhere between 40% and 50% of New Zealand's total emissions are methane, and it's primarily from the roughly 10 million cattle and the roughly 23 or 4 million or so sheep. They're major contributors. They're major opportunities for the country in terms of export markets in here. And so I think not only is the potential impact of dramatic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions for the country, you could easily achieve your 30% reductions based upon the 30% methane pledge. And frankly, you could achieve your NDC targets almost overnight by that simple utility. And that's true of a number of other geographies, but particularly for New Zealand. What's coming in the future are going to be taxes. You certainly have implemented one, but I think other parts of the world are going to be implementing them as well. And so there's the potential that exports from New Zealand into certain geographies might actually become limited if milk proteins and or in some cases beef don't meet that carbon threshold. And today that would be a challenge for many of them. And so these become great opportunities to expand businesses as well as achieve dramatic impacts on your emissions. The challenge is the recent changes in the regulatory environment for utilizing what is simply a native New Zealand unadulterated seaweed that's been eaten by humans for 100+ years. It has an incredibly good safety profile, and the possibility now it has to be registered as a veterinary medicine. That's a little frustrating, and it's an impediment for being able to get there, both in time and impact. So hopefully that gets worked on or is being worked on, and we look forward to the outcomes, because the second that changes, we will build out much larger infrastructure to supply New Zealand's livestock.
Well, thank you for letting me know about that impediment, and I'll certainly be speaking to my colleagues about it. I think what we really do see for ourselves as a country is a vision for us being able to produce wonderful solutions and to be part of the solution focus on this that doesn't involve destroying our entire economy. And this sounds like one of the answers to our prayers. So thank you very much for joining me today, Steve.
You're welcome.
Great work. Great work.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Anytime, happy to talk about it anytime.
Thank you,
so
Steve.